At some point in your life, you might have owned a Lacoste shirt. You know, the ones with the alligator on the front. But you probably aren't familiar with the history of the company. Lacoste was founded in the 1930s by a French tennis player named René Lacoste. His nickname as a player was the Crocodile because he was so tenacious on the court. That's how the shirts got their insignia. Lacoste was an international tennis star by the time he launched his brand in the 30s, but only a decade or so earlier, he wasn't considered a top player. He was getting served, literally, by most of the players he was going up against. He decided he needed to come up with a new strategy to compete. He realized his best chance for an advantage would be to create a book on his opponents. Every time he went up against an opponent or observed one as a spectator, he would write an entry about the person in this book. He would list their strengths and their weaknesses. He would note their temperament and how they seemed to react to different scenarios. Lacoste's book became his secret weapon. In the era before TV and highlight clips, most tennis players were operating in the dark when they took to the court against new opponents. There was no way to know about someone's tactics or habits, their strengths or their vulnerabilities. Thanks to this book, Lacoste had a unique advantage for his matches. With his combination of knowledge and tenacity, he went on to become one of the best players of his generation, winning 24 titles, including Wimbledon and the French Open. Today, Lacoste's technique of creating a book on opponents is the norm in sports. Almost every team, from Pop Warner football to Major League Baseball, keeps a book on their opponents. We might call those books scouting reports today, but it's fundamentally the same concept. It's keeping a record of your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, so you can put that knowledge into practice if you ever meet them in competition. Books and scouting reports are now ubiquitous in sports, but they are barely utilized in other competitive situations. What proves to be effective in baseball and football could work just as well in film, television, fashion, marketing, etc., if applied the same way. I certainly keep a mental book on the individuals I consider my competition. I follow all the moves they make carefully. If someone does something I consider smart, I make a note of it and try to think of a way I could do something similar. If I see my competition do something I consider foolish, I make note of that too. And then I look for a way to leverage that vulnerability against them down the road. The key is that I remove emotion from the equation when I make my mental notes. I don't get jealous when I see someone make a smart move, just like I don't get excited when I see them stumble. I just make note of what happened and file it away for later. I do that with my hip-hop competition, but also in film and TV. I always watch successful producers like Shonda Rhimes, Dick Wolf, Tyler Perry, and Ryan Murphy. I note which writers they like to work with and what sort of material they like to focus on. I'll observe how they roll out new shows and identify the messaging that's effective, as well as what doesn't seem to hit. I'll study how they navigate their relationships with the various networks and how they create leverage for themselves. When I sit down at night and hit the power button on my remote control, I am not watching as a casual fan. I'm studying each show the way René Lacoste studied tennis players back in the day, or the way an NFL scout watches his team's opponent for the following week. That's the level of commitment that's required to separate yourself from your competition. If you want to be a writer, you have to take notes on every author you read. If you want to be a chef, every time you eat a meal at a restaurant, you have to be thinking about how your competition works, with flavor, texture, presentation, and ingredients. If you want to be an ad executive, you just can't walk past a poster on a subway platform. You have to study every poster, supermarket, sales display, and bus wrap that you see, and make note of what catches your attention and what doesn't hold your eye. Don't complain that it takes the fun out of eating at a restaurant or watching a mindless TV show at the end of a long day. If you're truly passionate about your dream, you'll want to analyze as many TV shows as possible, or visit as many cutting-edge restaurants as possible. When you're hustling at your hardest, you're going to observe and engage in anything that gives you the slightest advantage. I keep my notes in my mind, but a powerful exercise is physically writing a book on your competition. If someone in your company has a senior position you'd like to occupy, write down the book on them. Try to identify what constructive things they do every day that has them in that position. Do they come in earlier than you do? Do they have a better relationship with the boss? Are they more outgoing? Do they have a tendency to get ahead on issues? Are they confident in presentation? Faster to respond to emails? Anything you think they do well, write it down. Then take note of their weaknesses. Do they tend to overpromise? Do they like to leave early at night? Do they trust their underlings to do too much of their work for them? Play a little fast and loose with their expense account? Get caught up in inter-office relationships that they probably shouldn't? Write all those down too, and then study that list. In it, you have the information for improving your performance, as well as the information that will reveal the most opportune places for you to strike when you're ready to make your move on that job. Whenever you write something down, it promotes a more focused way of thinking. When ideas only live in your mind, it's easy to lose track of them. Even if they're extremely powerful, they get lost in a stream of new information that's constantly entering your head. You can have an incredible idea of how to earn yourself a promotion, but it can get dislodged by the thought of what you might get for dinner. Then that idea that had promise gets swept back into the piles and piles of ideas that we all have crowding our consciousness. Maybe you'll get back to that great one, or maybe you won't. Writing those ideas down protects you against those ideas getting lost. Once it's on paper or your computer file, it's there forever, staring you back in the face whenever you look at it. Whether or not you act on it is still on you, but at least you won't forget it. Once you have it down on paper, you're setting yourself up to make something valuable happen.